Wesley is a research director at Infotech Research Group. During his time at Infotech, Wesley has conducted primary and secondary research on security strategy development, CISO enablement, and risk management. He's built interactive data analysis tools and developed quantification methods for IT performance and risk exposure. He holds an honors specialization in business administration from the Richard Ivey School of Business. Please join me in welcoming Wesley McPherson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. So I'm a director of cybersecurity research for an IT research advisory firm. It's basically, I just sit around all day researching up stuff and writing articles and all that kind of jazz, and hopefully you guys read it and get learned. So I have a very interesting job that I really, really like. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Basically, how can IT professionals effectively adopt a scientific mindset towards how they're managing their cybersecurity program, and as well, in addition to that, communications. I was mentioning earlier today about when I started my career, it was very technical in nature. In specific, I was doing specific threat intelligence research, and it was very nitty-gritty on the latest and greatest attack vectors and attack methodologies and stuff like that. Half a decade later, I spend a good amount of my time on things like communications. How do I talk to CEOs and CFOs and boards and things like that? I really had no concept of how much the softer side of security would be critical to the actual effectiveness. So what I want to talk to you today, security scientists applying scientific mindset to security decision making. Now, with any good presentation, I'm going to start off with a story. I want to think back about a similar profession to the information security professional, and I want to look at physicians in specific, and I want to go back about 200 years to that profession at that time. So basically, 200 years ago, disease was seen as an imbalance or a disturbance in the body that could be brought by a foul odor in the air or an evil spirit. Not a lot of decision-making kind of going on there. Treatment often considered of removing the offending substance through some bodily orifice. Surgery led to a 50% mortality rate. Now, when a profession's sole objective is to maintain and preserve life, a 50% hit rate is pretty damn bad overall. Many doctors were unlicensed, often learning mainly through apprenticeship, so you had kind of that local doctor in whatever that area, and they just kind of learned tips of the trade as time went on. Specialization was not a focus, and so basically you went to a doctor for anything and everything. There was no specialized doctors covering in-depth areas. But ultimately, things began to change. Doctors, the scientific method as a theory, started to creep into many different professions, one of them being the physician's profession. And I want to go into a specific example. Who here, I don't think anyone would know, but this is our dear friend, Ignaz Semmelweis. Has anyone heard of him? He's very, very obscure. I don't know why you would have heard of him. If you have, good for you. That's really interesting. Basically, he's a Hungarian doctor, credited as the savior of mothers. So basically the setting was 1846 at the General Hospital in Vienna. He collected data around the maternity ward deaths from perpetual fever, otherwise known as childbed fever. And so I want to kind of paint the picture about what was happening. Basically, there was 2 wards at this hospital, one that was staffed exclusively by midwives, and then one that was exclusively staffed by male doctors and male student doctors. Basically, the hospital had was working with the university in town there in Vienna. And basically, he collected data and found that expecting mothers at the male ward were 5 times more likely to die. And so he basically said, okay, great, let's try to figure out why is this happening, what's the major issue. So he started looking and, using good scientific mindset, he basically tried to identify differences, and he found a bunch of differences between the 2 wards. In the male ones, the expecting mothers would give birth on their backs, whereas the female midwife ward, they were giving birth on their sides, so we had them switch. No change overall. In the male ward as well, when a mother would die, a priest would walk around banging a bell, and he basically theorized that the loud noise scared the expecting mother to such a degree that she got a fever and ultimately died. So he made get rid of the bell. Priest still walked around, but got rid of the bell. No change overall. And he was exploring a lot, as any good scientist would, he's exploring a lot of these different theories and trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Ultimately, he got nowhere. and he decided to go on a little vacation, as you do 150 years ago. People still like to go on vacations when they can't think of an issue. But while he was on vacation, a pathologist friend of his died after getting infected while performing an autopsy on someone themselves who had died from perpetual fever. And basically, one of the key insights that he was able to derive from this instance is he realized that the symptoms of his friend who had passed away were the same as those experiencing childbed and perpetual fever. And so basically what he was able to theorize is that, and back then a lot of pathologists died a lot. Basically, you prick your finger, you get an infection, and 6 weeks later you're dead from whoever you were touching, basically. Basically, he theorized that the male doctors were carrying contaminant particles into the expecting mother's ward and basically contaminating them. So early in the day, they're doing an autopsy on someone that died from childbed fever, and basically just walk into the next room and go deal with the mother expecting to give birth. That's terrible medical practices by today's standards. So what he did is he basically said, hey, there's contamination. And this is basically the first instance of someone saying, hey, contamination is a thing. Basically ordered all his staff to start washing all their instruments with chlorine and soap. And basically the rate of childbed fever fell overall dramatically. So, that's a great story overall. Good for our dear friend Ignaz Semmelweis. Where the hell am I going with this, and what the hell does this have to do about cybersecurity? Basically, I'm trying to paint a picture around what a profession was like 200 years ago that ultimately has matured greatly in how it conducts itself, and I'm basically saying information security profession has to do the same. Basically, today, we have a high-demand profession. We all have great job security, which I think is fantastic. Mostly, though, a lot of our skills are gained through job experience informally. A lot of times, we're expected to know everything as it pertains to information security at our organization. Decision-making is often done through gut feelings. Hey, you know what? We're going to go buy this $100,000 tool because, yeah, that's what we did at the last place I worked at. It's not the most sound reason to spend money or conduct yourself. But ultimately, evolution is necessary for all of us in terms of how we make our decisions. So, I'm here to talk about how security professionals need to become security scientists. Ultimately, we need to take a scientific approach that is evidence-driven to how we conduct, and most importantly, how we actually make critical decisions around what we're doing. Now, obviously, everyone kind of knows that there's the need to measure your security program. We are all being asked consistently, are we secure or are you secure? Now, we get that question either from CEOs and the boards, from customers, from regulators. Now, who here has had that question posed to them in some manner or another? Vast majority. That question sucks. Are we secure? Are you secure? You can't really answer that because you can't say no, because that's just, hey, I'm not doing my job, by the way. No, we're not secure. Can't really say that. But you can't say yes either, because perfect security is nigh impossible. So one of the things I always talk about is we need to enhance the questions that we're actually asking to our IT professionals and to our security professionals, and where the questions are coming from, they need to enhance how they're asking these. So questions like, are my security controls appropriate to the threats they're mitigating? Now that's a real question me as a cybersecurity professional can really answer. Hey, yeah, given my industry, given my data, given my users, I know these are some of the threats I'm exposed to. Do I have controls that are effective given those threats? I can actually answer that question. Do our chosen security controls achieve the risk posture we desire? Hey, CEO and board, you told me to become this secure. However you figured that out, hopefully I helped you figure that out, but you told me to become this secure. I can safely say, yeah, we're that secure, or you know what, we're not there yet, or you know what, we're doing a bit better. That's an actual answer or a question that you can then answer. And then am I getting most bang for buck out of my security controls? Am I efficiently deploying the controls? Do I have 3 firewall vendors versus 1 or 6 endpoint antivirus software when I only need 2? These are kind of questions that you can answer as well. Now, I want to go into 2 major concepts here that ultimately we all have to understand and be able to figure out what is being asked of us when those questions are being posed. And so the 2 concepts I want to talk about for just a second are security quality and security maturity. These are 2 separate concepts, and I really want everyone to kind of understand what these are. Now, if you disagree with me, by all means, raise your hand. Let me know. Cybersecurity professionals are the best of devil's advocates, so please challenge me on my thoughts. But basically, security quality is basically the measurement of the effectiveness and efficiency of your security program. Is it actually doing what it should be doing? And it's the general performance of the security controls. So basically, hey, are the controls working effectively? Security maturity, though, is different. It's basically the measurement of a security program, usually up against a given standard or benchmark. Basically, it's a question of how formalized are the policies and processes, how comprehensive are some of the controls that you have put in place. Maturity allows you to know whether or not a policy or process is being followed. Security compliance often is a maturity question. It's not really a quality question, because most compliance obligations, whether they be contractual or legal or privacy standards, they're usually kind of saying, hey, here's a bunch of things we want to see, right? That's a maturity kind of question. I'll give you now both these, although I'd like to think they go hand in hand always, they don't always. You can have one and not have the other. So, you can have good security quality and maybe be unknown about your security maturity. How many people have said, in their lifetimes, hey, we're not in the news, but I don't really, we could be doing more. I don't really know what we're doing too well, right? So, hey, we got the quality, i.e. we're not in the news. That's a very cursory measure of my quality. But, you don't necessarily know the maturity of what are you doing that's keeping you out of the news potentially? Now, the one example I always like to use is Target. It's a very well-known breach, massive credit cards. Basically, Target had security maturity. If you look at what they were doing and what they had in place and controls, they were doing quite a bit. What they failed on was the actual security quality. So in specific, they had really good system monitoring as per prescribed by PCI DSS, but ultimately the real-time, hey, they were supposed to have eyes on the screen, that's where they failed. They didn't actually have the bodies there to monitor and detect something that was going on before it propagated to such a degree. So you can see how very related, but ultimately different topics. So basically, again, I'm just trying to berate the point that maturity and quality are very connected, and you can have one or the other, but ideally you want to have both. Up and to the right, up into the top quadrant. That's where we always all want to end up. Now I want to get into 4 methodologies, and these are actually the 4 ways in which you can measure your security program. And these are what I consider to be practical methodologies that any IT department can undertake to basically answer those questions of, are we mitigating the threats appropriately? Are we at the level of security that we should be? And I'll go into each one of them in detail, but basically security assessments, which is my favorite, vulnerability assessments, penetration tests, and then security audits. And I'll go into basic cons and pros and use cases of each one. Now, one thing I do want to talk about quickly is security metrics. Everyone wants to know security metrics. Hey, can you help me figure out what are security metrics? Security metrics alone are not measurement of a security program. Security metrics have to be taken in context of your organization and what you care about and business or organizational obligations and yada, yada, yada. You got to contextualize it. Just understanding things like mean time to incident resolution or mean time to patch or spam filter rate, any of those kind of really technical security metrics don't really mean anything unless you contextualize it. The spam filter rate for a university versus Wesley's Crab Shack is going to be very different, right? So why report on it unless you have context behind it? Now, the first one I want to go into is security assessments. This is basically my favorite overall methodology to measure a security program. The terminology, you guys probably know what this is, but I'm just calling it security assessments, whether or not you call it something else. Basically, it's a process to measure maturity of a security program. I want to be clear, it measures maturity. And usually it's completed up against an authority framework. So, hey, I'm going to assess my security program up against a given value authority framework, whatever that framework is, and I'll get into options in a second. One of the key points there, no systematic validation of controls. That's the key component there. You're basically saying, hey, this authority framework says, this line item says do this, and basically you're just asking yourself, am I doing that? There's a level of honesty you have to really answer these questions with, right? If I'm walking through, NIST SP 853 or CIS SCS or whatever framework, ISO 27001, 27002, you're looking at the controls line by line and you're basically saying, yeah, am I doing this? Maybe I'm doing a little bit of it, but not all of it. I'm missing this area. There's a level of, I have to be honest. And that's why there's no systematic validation. There's not like an objective third party, yes, you are, no, you aren't. It's just kind of, okay, why am I going to lie to myself, essentially? Results are often prioritized in a roadmap. Pros, basically super cost effective, i.e. free most of the time. Most of these value authority frameworks you can download for free online, so that's a plus. Shorter time to complete, usually I'd call it 2 full working days on average. If you basically can carve out 16 hours to maybe 20 hours of your life, you could probably complete one of these. And then develop action plans of items. That's a really good point there, is ultimately, you're saying, hey, here's the control line item, and I'm maybe doing half of it. You already then know what is the rest you have to do, right? You're getting that action part of it. Hey, are you deploying patches to all endpoints, servers, laptops, desktops? Yeah, I am, but only to my Windows environment, not to my Linux environment. Okay, great. The action item, extend patching to Linux environment. It's very easy to extrapolate the what do I have to do now. Cons, limited validation of security controls. As I mentioned earlier, basically there isn't that validation. It's just, hey, hope we're honest. And then who does this? Basically, as I said, you can do it internally, or you can engage lots of third parties that will conduct these for you. The value of authority frameworks is what this whole methodology really cruxes on. Pick your poison. I'm not really too specific on a specific value authority framework. Great, you're a manufacturing organization and you already have some ISO adherence within your manufacturing process, so maybe the C-suite and the board understands ISO, so let's just stick with ISO, right? Make your life a little bit easier. Federal agencies, obviously NIST, SB 853, it's really up to you. Good thing, all these you can download for free. Just Google it, and you can find these authority frameworks. In specific, I do want to call out 2, though. My personal favorite, Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls, used to be the SANS Top 20. This, to me, I believe, is the most robust, and I'll call it the most easily understood framework, and is very prescriptive in terms of the controls. I've just got some examples up there, but you really read the controls, and you're like, I really know what this means, and I can really answer, do I have it or I don't have it, versus I don't know how many times I've read a certain ISO control and looked at it and said, yeah, I'm still not positive on what the hell this thing is asking. Maybe I've got this, I'm not too sure. It doesn't really give you that super prescriptiveness. So that's one of my personal favorites. Another one that is big recently would be the NIST CSF. Basically, it took SP 853 and said, hey, make it applicable to all organizations regardless of industry, because SP 853 was for federal agencies processing restricted data, so they basically said, it's a really robust framework, but how can we take that and make it apply to any organization? And this is what they came out with. Again, free, download it online. I think you can download it in Excel copy, which is super easy then, obviously, for anyone. And ultimately, then, when you're doing the security assessments, you just get a nice output. This is a graphical bar output of a security assessment I did for a client, comparing security maturity across those areas. Now, the main point I want to have here, it's just a bar graph. It really doesn't matter all too much. The thing is, you just need to get that at some level so that you can show that to regulators, C-suite, board, or whatever, and then maybe, hey, maybe you make a timeline. This is 2017. Now I'll show you 2018 scores. Maybe then I'll show you 2019 scores. This largely, it doesn't really matter. You just need to have some sort of nice output that you can present to someone. They say, oh, okay, I get it. I understand how mature our security program is. Here's another example, just more detailed that I did with another client. Again, bar graphs. It's just pretty simple stuff that you can explain overall maturity. The second major methodology I want to talk about is vulnerability assessments. Now these are, I call them vulnerability assessments, different than vulnerability scans, and I want to explain kind of what I mean by that. Basically, complete process to identify, evaluate, and prioritize system vulnerabilities. Obviously, this is using systems, software to actually identify these. IP scanning, you can either do internal or external, depending on what you care about. This measures quality to a certain degree. I won't say it gives you full quality performance of a security program. Pros, identify specific exploit vectors. You can really, a major pro of these is you really scope your attack surface. So many organizations will say, yeah, I don't, I have somewhat of a good understanding of my actual risk surface, but this will really help you kind of capture that understanding. Quick time to current state, depending on the type of software you're using, pretty quickly overall. Cons, shows only the vulnerabilities. And so that's what I meant when it's a glimpse of your quality, right? Because it's able to figure out, what are the numbers of missing patches or misconfigured systems or whatever that you have, but, that's mostly only prevention. It doesn't really, figure out how well you're able to detect activity or respond to activity, right? So it's just one part of overall quality. Can be costly, depending, and then a false sense of comprehensiveness, nothing new to technology. Who does this? Basically, you can either get the software yourself, or you can engage a third party. When these are applicable, whole lot of different areas, basically the vulnerability assessments encapsulate a lot more than just a vulnerability scan. These are all functionalities that are now built in these vulnerability scanning tools or vulnerability assessment tools, right? So you're seeing the breadth of capabilities that's offered by the software as much, much higher. In specific, I want to call it the last one, vulnerability exploitation. That's probably my favorite of the advancements here, because basically what it's saying is it's going to the point of, hey, I've figured out there's a vulnerability here in whatever fashion that may be. Now I want to exploit it and validate it. Really make sure that, yes, this is an actual vulnerability living within your system. 3 major types of vulnerability assessment tools. You've got network vulnerability scanning tools. These are kind of the baseline tools, near commoditization, that probably most of you guys are familiar with. The Qualys, the Rapid7, the Nessus, all these kind of players. As I said, they don't validate the exploitability of the vulnerability. And basically, when you're considering these, you basically have to say, do I want agent-based or passive? So do I want an agent locally on the system I'm scanning, or do I want passive, i.e. network scanning? And do I want authenticated or unauthenticated? Basically, am I going to provide the software credentials to really do a detailed scan or not, depending on use case, right? Obviously, if you do agent and authenticated, you're getting a lot more information, but it's not as, doesn't as well resemble a real-life attack, essentially. Application scanning tools, basically scan against an application, identify, they can do a whole bunch of different functionality, integrity checking, and all that kind of stuff to make sure that the application actually runs pretty well. And basically DAST and SAS, dynamic application security testing, and static application security testing are the big ones you really care about there. Now the last one, as I mentioned, vulnerability exploitation, basically exploits the vulnerability that's been identified. The first 2, I would say 1 and 3, seeing ultimate convergence, and basically see pure convergence of those within the next several years. The big thing, if you want to do 3, which I recommend for many organizations, you got to have a test environment, a dummy environment, whatever it is, sandbox, to actually kind of do that exploitation, because you don't want to do that on live systems, obviously. Basically, I think everyone should be doing some level of network vulnerability scanning, just scanning of their environment, of their IPs, checking that stuff. Depending on who you are and what you need, maybe number 2 applies. How many internet-facing systems you have, how critical are some of your internal applications, that's more of a use case. And the third, really, if you've got the environment, you've got the need for that level of validation, great, go for it. And again, outputs. Basic outputs, easy outputs. No business executive doesn't understand red is worse than orange. So, stuff like that is basic outputs that, again, similar to the bar graphs, just enables you to better communicate with those people you have to communicate with. The third one, then, penetration tests. Basically, emulation of a real-life method to breach into an organization, offered by third parties as a service. Basically, a variety of products, tools, and methods are basically used in whatever kind of fashion. You can scope it depending on what you really care about or what you want to assess. This is the big one that measures quality to me. This one really kind of says, okay, I think I've got everything in place. I think I've done a good job at putting these controls in. Now I want some third party to actually validate that these controls are working effectively. It basically takes, a penetration tester, more or less takes a vulnerability assessment and ramps it up to 11 or 12, kind of. Great. They're doing all these different techniques or methods. A lot of the tools a pen tester uses is the exact same from the last example I was going over. But, there's that real world person behind it that's actually carrying it out. Pros, assess current security control effectiveness. You often get that roadmap output. Hey, here's all the issues we found, and here's some remediation recommendations. The third-party unbiased validation, that's the big component there. Basically, you're saying, hey, I think I've done a good job. Let's go get some third party to really say whether or not we've done a good job. A lot of times as well, it's adherence to compliance or regulatory requirements. You see a lot more pen testing requirements being baked into compliance, regulatory, contractual agreements, all that kind of stuff. Cons, costly and can be timely. Obviously, you're engaging a third party. These guys are expensive for the most part and can take a while depending on how you scope the engagement. And there could be a potential limited scope of discovery as well. Again, depending on how you scope it, right? If you just say, hey, I want a network-based only pen test, that's what you're measuring, your quality of your network security as opposed to other things. Who does this? That's the big thing. Validated, reference check, third-party penetration testers. I'll get into what I mean by who in a second. The analyst perspective, my personal perspective, everyone should do a pen test. I see why not, because it's a very valuable resource, but you have to consider what's my priority right now. Do a penetration test only after you've done a first pass at finding the holes. There's many, many times I've talked to CISOs and they basically say, I want to do a pen test. I say, great, that's fantastic. That's where your head should be. Have you done a security assessment or some other cursory discovery method of your security holes? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, okay, great. Do you, top of mind, do you know a bunch of, issues that you have right now? Oh, yeah, totally. Okay, why are you then going to go pay some third party per hour rate to then go tell you those holes you already know? If you know the holes already, go work on those holes. Why do you have to go to a third party, right? Pen testers are really only applicable once you kind of say, you know what, I think I'm good. Now I want the experts to come and test it, right? There's that kind of sequence that you should really walk through. Signs you need a penetration test. There's a whole bunch of use cases as for when upgraded new infrastructure, new applications, uptick in malicious behavior, industry as security regulations, obviously that's changing, merger acquisition, recent breach, and then almost anyone once you've done the basics right. Now, in terms of who's doing this, basically, I categorize them into 6 different groups that will provide these professional services. First are professional services firms. Those are, the big consulting firms that you guys probably all know. They'll do some level of pen testing. Second, basically, security services firms. Again, consulting firms, big professional service firm, but specific to security. They'll often provide this as a service. Maybe one aspect of a larger assessment. So great, I'm going to work with you to build out your entire security strategy and roadmap over the next 3 years. Phase 1 of 10 phases will be let's do a pen test to help build out that, right? The third one, which is my favorite, is actually the dedicated penetration testing firm. So these are just companies that sole job and purpose is just pen testing. That's all they do. They've got a bunch of white hat hackers. You obviously want to check and see their credentials and see what they've done before, where have they been around, get those reference checks from previous customers. But those people, those ones that just do those firms, just do that service, they're my favorite. Because to me, there's absolutely no ulterior motive with them. They're providing you their sole service, and there's never some like, hey, I want to try and sell you something else later. I always recommend mix it up. If you did a pen test with one professional services penetration testing firm, maybe do them for 1 year, maybe 2 years, but then switch. Go to a third. There's a lot of them out there, and get other companies' perspectives on how well your security program is doing. The fourth, the managed security service providers. So these are the Solutionary, the Dell SecureWorks, the Herjavec Group. They'll do a lot of these pen testing as well, and they probably do it pretty well, or they do it very well. My personal opinion, and this is my personal opinion, I'm a little hesitant about that because, we did a penetration test, and what we found out is your security monitoring isn't too great and your mean time to response. But you know what? If you outsource your security monitoring to a MSSP, that's a formal recommendation. Oh, by the way, we're an MSSP. We'll totally do that for you. I question that just a little bit. Now, other people may have other opinions, but that's just my kind of personal opinion. Similar, the regional or small integrators, a lot of them I don't think have any business doing pen testing, but for whatever reason, many organizations have existing relationships with these kind of SIs, and now they're kind of banging down the door saying, hey, I'm already paying you one paycheck, and we've already figured out a contract. Can you add this additional service? And they're obviously saying, well, we're not going to say no to money. So yeah, we'll add this into our bucket of services we provide. Again, I don't really think they have much business being there. And again, question their, basically where they're coming from and ultimate some of the recommendations they may have. For government agencies, the last one, I'll actually switch to that. The Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. This is a great resource. The U.S. government, I think, does a great job overall of trying to support government agencies, municipal, state, and federal level in trying to bolster their security And so you can engage with these depending on what size of government you are and what level. The discounting varies basically. If you're federal, I think you can get it 100% for free. They'll just do it because you're deemed as a federal agency and worthy of protection, whereas I think if you're municipal, it does cost money. But anyways, there's government resources for government clients out there, basically. 4 variables when it comes to pen testing. Basically, the first one is you want to scope out what am I actually pen testing. Network, application, or human. So the conventional network attacks, yeah, basically, hey, try and break into my network. And those are all the conventional network attacks that we're all familiar with. The second one, application. So hey, I want to do some cross-site scripting, some SQL injection, something like that to really plug, try and mess up with my application that I've got. And then the last one, the human. Basically, hey, try and exploit the actual humans, my end users, and that's done through the email phishing, the texting, there's some word for texting and phishing combined together, and then the fake phone calls, or even the physical, hey, try and break into my office and see if you can get access to the data center, data closet, or see if you can get access to, a lot of CIOs and CISOs like to, when they engage these third parties, basically say, hey, ultimate sign that you did your job is if I can one day walk into my office and you're sitting behind my desk. That's always, I think, a cool challenge, I guess I'll say, to those social and human pen testers out there. Black, gray, or white box. That's basically determination of how much information you're providing to the pen testers. Black box, I think that's probably one of the best from the average organization because basically you're saying, hey, I'm not telling you anything. Just act like a traditional hacker, attacker would and try and break in. I'll give you some objectives, like I want to see if you can steal this data, get access to this system, whatever, compromise this person's credentials. But I'm just telling you the objective. I'm not giving you any information about my systems, what I have in place, anything. So it's very much emulates a real-life attack. The white box then provided usually some full disclosure of information. Now, the idea behind that is that the black box, chances are they're going to find the most obvious holes and exploit those right away. Whereas the white box, you can kind of say, hey, here's all the information, tell me issues. And they'll also then probably be able to find some of the deeper, more hidden, more complex issues because they have that breadth of information that you've provided them. And then gray box, basically somewhere in between. You can figure out how much information you want to give them or not. I would say most organizations want to do black box because it's real life. And then determine if you want to do white box, there's a specific threat that you really are concerned about, right? Hey, I want you to emulate an insider activity. My company develops a lot of IP, so I want you to be a disgruntled employee, mimic that kind of threat or risk scenario for me. External, internal, basically, hey, are you attacking internally or, then penetrating the network and some level of social? Or are you internal, and so you're already inside, and so then I want to kind of see that from let's assume you've already gotten inside in whatever method, so now test internally how well you can move laterally and gain, perform credential escalation and circumvent any kind of internal controls and monitoring. And the last one then is basically aggressiveness of the test. This is one that you really want to make sure you figure out before you engage a pen tester, right? So let's say, hey, I want you to be super non-aggressive. So I want you to stay under the radar. Number of packets being sent are very low. It's very low and prolonged because you're really trying to perpetrate that persistent attacker versus a super aggressive, hey, think you can DDoS my network? So, you want to make sure if you're saying something like that, you've got it stipulated out first. You understand what you're asking for. You understand what's going to happen, right? Because if you basically say, hey, try and get in and steal this data at all costs, be as aggressive as you want, you got to be prepared for that. And you have to understand what you're basically signing up your organization for. And then the last one, which is my least favorite, is the security audit. And the security audit really, to me, all it does basically is it takes that security assessment and adds that validation. So basically, you kind of say, so this is basically, this is the only one that measures maturity and quality as well. So basically, because you'll say, hey, this is what I'm doing from a security perspective, and usually, again, assessed up against a authority framework, and so it's kind of like, hey, I've got all these things, and this, I've got all the stuff that ISO tells me to do. Great. I'm going to go now validate that you actually do have that stuff in there and that it actually works. So basically, you're saying you don't trust the person, essentially. Great, you told me you have this. You told me you have this policy. I'm going to go find that policy, read it, make sure it's in place. You told me you have this process. I'm going to go find that process, make sure the staff understand it. You told me you have this technology in place. I'm going to go check it, check the policies in the software, make sure it's doing all you said it's doing, right? So you're really kind of validating basically everything that you claim to be doing, essentially. So it's the only one this is the only one that covers maturity and quality. Pros, comprehensive validation, easy to understand progress. Basically, I had issues, I did X, now I have 2. Again, similar kind of a pro. Cons, the big one, it's costing and timing. These are, if you do a true security audit, it is very costly and very timely, can take a long time. A con as well, often organizations that engage in security audit, it's a big process. And there's level of knowledge to the C-suite and the board, and so basically at the end of it, you damn well are going to be held accountable for those ultimate results because it's a big initiative, right? The company's spending a lot of money and time to do this. You as the professional are now going to be held accountable. May fail to account for organizational nuances. Sometimes the auditors miss things, right, in terms of culture and understanding of organizational priorities. Who does this? This is the validated security auditors. Basically, Big 4 accounting firms, they're the most common organizations that do these. There are other organizations that do these for sure, but ultimately, the only time I see anyone doing these, for the most part, is a customer says you have to have a security audit, like a validated, third-party, unbiased, I'm talking Ernst & Young, PwC, Deloitte, whatever, audit, and I want to see that. Or I need to get the rubber stamp that I'm compliant to certain something, right? Basically, a security assessment, the first methodology I went over, you could say, hey, I need to meet ISO. So do a security assessment, walk through that, self-check and all that kind of stuff. That'll get you 99% of the way there. But then ultimately, if you want that actual rubber stamp to say, yes, I am certified, you then do have to engage a security auditor to really provide that final rubber stamp that, yeah, everything is as it should be. So hopefully you can kind of see the different use cases, pros, cons, and probably the different priority for most of you guys in which you would engage some of these different methodologies. And again, as always, outputs. Security outputs, or security audits have basic outputs. I've stolen a bunch of these from some of the Big 4 firms. But again, the whole idea behind each one of these methodologies is you do get some style of output, right? Some report, some graph, some bars, something's colored, something's got percentages on it. That's all good stuff that you can now put in front of C-suites and executives. Obviously, tailor. Most of these methodologies are really good at providing, the reports and the outcomes in, like I said, colors, percentages, those kind of things. No business leader doesn't understand red, bad, green, good, right? And the people that are carrying these out, providing these services, understand that. And they've moved away from only speaking Wookiee to now speaking business terms, right? One of the things I always like to talk about are some actual useful security metrics. So now that I've gone over some of the actual methodologies, okay, what are some useful security metrics? These are just common ones that I see most organizations trying to employ and basically measure. These are just common ones across the board. Take them or leave them as far as I'm concerned. Chances are you can, again, you do need to contextualize the security metrics to your organization and figure out, great, if I'm going to measure average time to detect and respond, how can I contextualize that and how can I track that over time? There's no use in measuring a security metric once, getting that data, and then not showing, hey, how did that turn out the next time, right? When it comes to science, you don't want to just collect and analyze the data. You want to consistently collect and analyze the data. Now, one point that I do want to mention, 2 terms I hear come up a lot when clients or organizations I'm working with, when they'll say we want to measure our security program. These are 2 things that don't measure security, but a lot of times people think they do. Basically, a risk analysis, identify the risk given a certain scenario, usually limited scope to a project or change, right? So you are saying, hey, I want to get a new CRM, I want a new HRIS, I want to change whatever, any kind of system change or whatever, right? A risk analysis will look at that given project change and basically scope out and figure out what is the risk associated with that. Now, it's not measuring anything to do with your security program, really, right? It's just saying that, hey, you know what? You've got data in a cloud environment, and that's a privacy risk. Great, now I understand that. It's not telling you how well you're actually kind of protecting it, right? It gives you information to then figure out, what do I care about and how should I be applying controls, but it in of itself does not give you that information. A lot of different use cases for it. Second one then, business impact analysis, assessment of the potential business disruption as a result of a negative IT change. Again, that just basically helps you figure out what are my most critical systems that I really care about that, I can't waver on availability or uptime or anything like that. It doesn't actually tell you, how effective are security controls. Again, it helps you infer where should I be focusing my time and effort, but it doesn't tell you how well you're defending your organization. So again, two things that don't measure security, maturity, or quality. They help you figure out, priorities and where should I be putting budget and that kind of stuff, but they don't tell you maturity or security, maturity, or quality. Now I want to go back to our dear friend Ignaz Semmelweis. So basically, he had measured his environment, come to a sound scientific conclusion, and determined a solution. He was all good, right? He had one more thing he had to do. All he had to do was communicate at that point. He'd figured out a solution. Now he just has to go tell people. Sounds so simple. Ultimately, he went on this, he was going from city to city, basically explaining his findings and advocating soaping and disinfecting hands and using chlorine to disinfect. Ultimately, doctors were very upset. He was basically saying, you're the reason all these people are dying. That's not something good to tell someone when their sole objective is to keep life, and you're basically saying, hey, you're the issue. He was not tactful. He basically berated those who didn't listen to him or anything like that. I think that's a big issue with security professionals today. Last year, I listened to who is now the previous CISO of Facebook Talk, and he basically mentioned about how, as security professionals, we ask end users in the business to walk this tightrope. Don't click that email, don't click that link, don't download that attachment, don't stick that USB stick. We ask them to walk this tightrope, and the moment they fall off, we didn't put a net, and then we go yell at them for falling off. It's kind of the same. It's very much like that. We have to stop berating the organization and making them feel inferior, just because we know security and they've somehow failed to adhere the 10,000th thing that we've now told them to do. Ultimately, doctors gave up on washing chlorine. He traveled around Europe. Not many listened to him. And here's the most ironic part. He eventually lost his job, and in 1865, at 47, he was committed to an asylum. He would there die from sepsis, which is a fatal complication of bloodstream, something that ultimately he wouldn't have been infected with if the doctors in that asylum had adopted his approaches of disinfection. So quite the very ironic story overall. Now, communication is key. Basically, security professionals is somewhat of an in-crowd. I think in terms of, I'll call it arrogance as profession, I think it goes lawyers, doctors, security professionals. I'll say it firsthand. We all think we're the smartest people in the room. Sometimes we are. I'm not going to disagree with that. But, you don't make friends that way. We can't berate our business stakeholders for trying to do their job. Communication needs to be tailored and providing related but different views to practitioners, IT managers, business leaders, and then senior leaders. Now, three things that basically I get a lot of pushback from. If you measure something, you should be ready to do something about it. Some prefer to be ignorant rather than negligent, right? So the whole idea is, do I really want to shine a flashlight there? Because the moment I shine a flashlight, I now have to do something about it. Because if I don't, I'll be negligent. So I'd rather just be ignorant and say, I never knew. That's okay, old school thinking. That doesn't really work anymore. Frankly, the matter of the fact is, if you don't measure today, you're still considered negligent. Ignorance has nothing to do with it anymore. You should always just be measuring, kind of. What if you get the world? I've actually heard this basically say, hey, what if I do measure? And I basically say, hey, I need these 100 things, and I get 100 things, and then I still get breached. That's a very bad situation, obviously, right? That's where communication comes into play. You really need to express and effectively communicate that, yeah, you gave me this money, I did all this. There's still some remaining residual risk that has not been dealt with. You have to be always clear that perfect security is not achievable. And the third pushback I always get, business may not support security. Yeah, I could measure all I want, but they're not going to buy in, they're not going to support me, they're not going to give me money. That's fine. That's not necessarily our job. Our job as security professionals are risk management professionals. Other people make the risk-based decisions. So let's tell them what we think is best. Let's make sure there's probably a paper trail, some emails, some documents sitting somewhere that says, I did my job, and if the CEO, CFO says, no, we're not going to invest, you've done your part. Ultimately, as a security professional, you've tried to mitigate the risk. They're the business leaders, and they make that risk decision, but you've done your part. And ultimately, That is how to apply scientific mindset to measuring your security program. Thank you all very much.